Hello, I'm Katie Kammler, MU Extension Horticulture Field Specialist, and today we're going to share a fruit report. The topic today is actually planting an orchard. So when you're planning a new orchard, the first thing to think about is your business and marketing plan. Because if you can grow things, that's great, but you have to be able to sell them to make it a business. So some things to consider include equipment cost, the plant costs themselves, the setup, all of the things that go into planting. What kind of pesticides are you going to have to use? If that's herbicides to manage problem weeds and keep problem weeds out as plants continue to grow. It's also managing those diseases and insects. We're also thinking about fertility. What are fertilizer costs going to be? What soil tests are going to cost? All of those things that are involved in producing a healthy orchard and healthy plants. And never forget the cost of labor. A lot of times we neglect to think about even our individual time as it has a cost to it. And then, of course, how are you going to market it? Are you going to do U-pick? Are you going to be wholesale? Or are you going to be some type of operation in between? So that also adds costs and are different options to think about. Also think about food safety planning. Food safety is a huge deal now, and we have all of those things to think about because we want to keep our clients safe and provide a healthy, safe food source for them. Site selection and assessment. You have to have a good site so you can be successful. So you want a site that has good airflow. The ideal sites, the upper side of a gradual slope, rolling or elevated land. We do not want to be in low-lying areas where they could be frost pockets. Typically, when we talk about that, we're talking about cold damage that might happen in the spring. But also think about that airflow and good air movement as helping prevent diseases because it helps dry out those plants. Soil quality is also extremely important. We struggle with soil quality here in Missouri, so that is definitely something to assess before you start. So you're looking for deep, well-drained, moderately fertile soils. Organic matter is important, but organic matter can be added. So that's where that site preparation, the soil fertility, all of those things before planting is very important. Always do a soil test, find out where you are, and see what needs to be amended. The other big thing about orchard plantings are they need to be in full sun, and full sun is considered 8 hours a day. So remember that when you're looking at that, look at it at all times. Is there a wooded area to the west that they actually get afternoon shade? So things to look at. So look at it all times during the day to see what the shading is and if you might need to do some site modifications there. Variety selection, hugely important. There are so many varieties out there. And in Missouri, we want to look for something with disease resistance because of our climate, we have lots of issues with diseases. Look at ripening dates because for apples, we could be harvesting apples depending on variety from June to November. So definitely make sure you look at that and see what works with your marketing plan. There's flavor and customer preferences. A lot of customers have preferences for specific varieties of apples, and sometimes it's hard to get them to change that preference. And peaches, a lot of times if people are growing peaches, they don't want clingstone peaches. So that's something to look at. Also, winter hardiness. This is very, very important because of our climate here in Missouri and depending on what part of the state you're in. So that winter hardiness is something that we definitely need to check out. Rootstocks, the dwarfism comes from rootstocks. So many orchards now, we don't see full-size trees. We see a lot of the dwarf or semi-dwarf, depending on what your orchard plan is. We look at early bearing from rootstocks. We also look at disease resistance, as I mentioned, hugely important. And that rootstock also provides winter hardiness. So a lot of this planning needs to happen before you order plants. You've got to figure out where you're going with that. The other huge thing is pollination requirements. In apples in particular, you need cross-pollination. So you're going to have more than one variety, and those varieties have to be blooming at the same time to provide that cross-pollination. Orchard preparation. Think about the layout. Are you going to do a high density planting? The two pictures on the right are actually, one's a peach and one's an apple, high density planting. And you can see in the bottom picture, because it's early spring, you can actually see the trellis wire and post. And in this peach planting, you can kind of see one post there, but there is wire in here also. A lot of orchards are going to the high density planting, and that requires a different layout. It requires a different number of plants. It also typically does require some type of trellis system. And the old standard is the freestanding orchards, but as I said, a lot of them are going to the high density. So that's definitely something to explore and look at. Also think about weed control. Very, very important, particularly if your site has some troubling weeds and some problem weeds. So you look at that weed control and see what you need to manage. Also look at soil drainage and soil improvements, very important. And fruit trees do not like to have wet feet. So look at where you might need to make some drainage improvements. Also establish an orchard ground cover. Once you get those problem weeds under control, as you can see in these pictures, the peaches actually have a weed barrier within the row. And then typically in between is some type of grass ground cover. So those are very helpful in the orchard. Also think about what kind of water sources you have. Are you going to provide irrigation? You can see in the bottom picture, they actually have irrigation traveling on that bottom wire, a drip system on that bottom wire of the trellis. Deer management. This one is one that you need to look into because just like us, deer really do like our orchard crops. So looking at fencing and other things to keep those pests out. And then an annual maintenance plan after establishment. So you need to think about your pest management, and pest management includes weeds, insects, diseases, wildlife, all of those things that can affect your bottom line. Remember, this is about making a profit, and so you've got to think about all of those things and take those into consideration. So that pest management plan isn't a one-shot deal and you're done. You have to keep after it, and there are specific spray schedules for orchard management. Also, during the growing season, you got to think about thinning, pruning. That's an important annual job. So the bottom picture, we were actually teaching some pruning and looking at some apple trees there. Fertility and managing that fertility. Healthy trees are going to produce more crops for you. Also think about that irrigation. Typical rule of thumb is 1.5 inches of water per week is what they need. And you realize that here in Missouri, a lot of times we don't get that. So managing that water, managing fertility, all of these things listed help keep happy plants and healthy plants. And therefore they're going to produce a great fruit crop for us. Now we're going to talk just a little bit about the September calendar of activities for tree fruits. You do not want to do fertilizer after September 1. You want to look at boll management in September, a very important problem that was talked about in our last video newsletter. Winter planning is also hugely important. If you need anything pruning, all the pruning is done in the dormant season, some of the dormant oil applications for pest prevention, all of those things need to be thought about and planned out. Under peach and stone fruits, the harvest is typically ending. You might have a few late varieties. You want to think about finishing up that summer pest and disease management and practice good orchard sanitation. We don't want to leave any diseased fruit laying under the trees that can provide inoculum for next year. Apples and pears, continuing that summer pest management, and harvest is typically underway for early season apples. And then for small fruits, strawberries is annual plastic culture. That is when we plant, early September. So here's an example of a new planting of strawberries. Matted row, you're going to maintain those plantings. And then on all the rest, no fertility after September 1. We want them to finish up growing and going into the dormant season. Brambles, finish harvesting any primocane bearing fruits. You want to remove any floricanes after the harvest ends. Remember, those are the ones that have finished fruiting and are going to die. And then continue that pest management in brambles, especially that spotted winged Drosophila, who really like those ripening fruit. Blueberries, you're maintaining the plantings, especially irrigation, because it can still be very dry in September. Elderberries, you're finishing up your fruit harvest, still might be a few out there, and continuing that pest management, especially the SWD again. Grapes, harvest is underway, continued pest management, and continuing with that. And remember, if you have any questions regarding any type of fruit production, vegetables, horticulture, any of it, we are always readily available to answer your questions. So if you could look at the map on what county you're located in, you can find who your local horticulture specialist is. And please feel free to email us or give us a call. We're always glad to help. Thank you.